Good afternoon and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week we have the expert from the world of business sharing their knowledge, insights and tips to help you reduce costs, increase profits and drive efficiencies. If there is a topic you would like covered, or if you feel that you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie and perhaps we'll be here one day soon having a chat. Today's guest is a person who left school at the age of 16 with his leaving cert. He spent more than 35 years in the technology industry in a variety of roles and in a number of countries including Australia, the US, the UK and across Europe. He's an executive coach with the Alternative Board. And I'm delighted to welcome Martin Kelly to You and Your Business. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, Alec. Good to be here.
I suppose I have to just start. 16 leaving school with a leaving cert. Wow.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it was probably more a function of the fact that I was from a large family. There were 6 of us in the family and I was the second youngest. So I think my parents were just about getting tired of having had so many kids, so bundled me off. I was reasonably okay at learning, so they tried me out at school at a very early age, and I managed to hold my way through the years and came out the other end at 16 years of age, which when you think about now is a crazy young age to be leaving school.
It is. I know. I think we were mentioning I was just 17 when I was doing my leaving, and I felt like a child. So
yeah.
I struggled with it. I don't know how you managed it.
Yeah, it was tough. I actually enjoyed school because I was quite sporty. So I found the school part was good. But when I left school, I went straight to college. And I was from a farming background. So
all right.
My parents didn't go to college, and I think I had one older brother who did go to college, but he went in Limerick, I went in Dublin, and so I went to college literally not knowing what university was about. I knew I signed up to do subjects that I enjoyed at school, but I had no idea what university was about. So I struggled in college because I was just too immature, I think.
It's amazing. I think we all have a tendency to think that college is going to be just another version of school.
Yeah.
What you suddenly discover the same disciplines aren't there, so it now gets bounced back onto you.
Absolutely, and because it wasn't so structured, it was so freewheeling that you had to make things happen. You had to, to make friends, etc. You had to join clubs. You had to get involved. And it took me a little while to get used to that. Plus, I was from Kildare originally, so I was commuting to and from. So I ended up spending a lot of my time on buses going up and down and not enjoying college life until probably the last year or so. And then I was a little bit older because I came out of college at 19, which again is crazy. Wow. Crazy young age, and so the last year I was beginning to get the hang of it, and then it was time to move on. So.
Yeah, you could have been just starting college for a lot of people at that stage.
Yeah.
And did you get into the sporting college when you were there?
I did, but I had played sport. I went to a boarding school. I played rugby pretty much every day or most days for 5 years, and I got to a point where I was almost sick of it, so I didn't play sport in the first year in college because I just wanted to have a little bit of time out.
Right.
But I did pick it up after that, and I've continued to be active.
It's amazing. Sometimes you have there you are with your interest and enthusiasm for rugby, and now it's such a sport and great pay and travel and everything that goes with it these
absolutely.
days.
It's phenomenal how far rugby has come, and you have to take your hat off to they run it not only as a sport but as a fantastic business. They've made a great job of
fantastic.
running
well,
it.
Things have moved on in this country. So anyway, you've gone on to college. What were you studying at college?
I had no clue what to do because I say with no college background really in my family. So I picked the subjects I enjoyed most at school, and I did. I wanted to become a vet because I was from an agricultural background, but I wasn't smart enough. So I picked subjects that I enjoyed, which were history and geography, which were very traditional. At that stage, I think I was thinking I'd probably become a teacher. So I studied those subjects and I enjoyed it, but it didn't work. It wasn't something I wanted to end up doing.
Yeah, you were sort of kind of heading off for that safe, pensionable job for life.
Absolutely. That was I can still hear my late mother's voice in my ear telling me that was what I had to do to become a teacher. And I had summers off and I'd have good pay and I'd get a pension and all of that, which didn't interest me at 16.
So what did you do then?
So I actually left college literally not knowing what to do. And in those days, it was a precursor to FOSS. There was an organisation called ANCO.
Oh, ANCO, I remember as well. It shows my age too.
A long, long time ago now. But they ran courses for people as transition from college to work, basically. And I signed up for one of those courses because they actually paid you as well. I think it was something like £90 a week or something, but it was a small amount, and they helped you to get your thinking straight around. I must say it was a fantastic course. It was about, I don't know, 6 or 7 months, but they helped me to think about what I wanted to do, what my skills were, put together a CV and so on. And I literally put together a CV, and I walked the streets of Dublin handing out CVs with nicely laid out, because they gave you advice on how to do that, but not really knowing what I wanted to become. And I handed one in to a technology company on Harcourt Street, and strangely enough, they called me up and called me in for an interview. And cut a long story short, I ended up getting a job with a technology company, having gone through UCD without ever touching a computer. This was in 1970. I started in 79, I left in 82, so it was in the very early 80s.
It's amazing, like, what state were computers in those days? I can only imagine, we're in the infancy of the computer.
Very much, yeah. I mean, the very early stages, there was no computers for use by students that I can recall. I think they had, the library had some form of a computerized system of storing, and they were the little cards that they used were there was a computer room, which was like, the Starship Enterprise. It was so exotic, but only people who studied computer science really went there. I certainly never did, and so I came right through college without ever touching a computer.
But you found an interest and a fascination with technology. I
did, actually, I was most surprised of all myself at the fact that when I got into the industry, and it was very early stages of the Apple II was sort of the first personal computer. There were things like Atari and various sort of home computers, but they were very primitive. The Apple II was the first that was in any way used by business. And the company that I joined, I happened to be the Apple distributor in this country. So I joined them, and I learned, some of the basic spreadsheet and word processing programs that were around at the time. And my initial role was sort of teaching people how to use them and selling them and so on. But I really did enjoy it. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing to get in, and when you see where they've come to at this stage. But sort of getting back, I suppose spreadsheets would have been really the big thing of the day, that you could do multiple calculations and
absolutely,
those sort of things.
Yeah, that was. I remember my first interview. The chap who interviewed me showed me a spreadsheet and asked me what did I think could possibly be the possible uses of it, and I remember scratching my head to think and came up with some answer. But yeah, the spreadsheet VisiCalc was the original spreadsheet, yeah. and that was the app that word processing to some extent, although the printing capability wasn't as good then. So you could produce nice documents, but it wasn't difficult. The dot matrix type printers to.
All right, I remember those as well from my days. I'm confessing to all sorts of things here. I remember them. By the way, if you're just joining us, you're listening to me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my studio guest is Martin Kelly of the Alternative Board, sharing his knowledge on the business support mechanisms that are available to business owners. And we're just sort of reminiscing about Martin got involved in technology in its infancy here in Ireland, and there's many lessons to be learned. It just shows to being at the cutting edge at the beginning. So it kind of took you on. It's strange, my own business ended up being involved in graphic design, where Apple sort of were the leaders in that.
That's right.
And so you could actually see pictures on screen.
That's right.
As opposed
the
to
early
code.
Apple, even before the Mac, they had a product called the Lisa, which was in about 1982, and that was a graphical user interface, which in those days was quite radical. But yeah, I mean, I was lucky to have been involved in the personal computer world at the early stages in the 80s, just by pure chance.
I suppose a lot of our listeners of a certain age wouldn't have a clue what we're talking about when they look at a smartphone and think of the huge amounts of memory and the huge amounts of power behind them that they can do things with today. If you go back to your day to do a simple spreadsheet.
That's right. It was difficult, but it was also expensive. I mean, the original personal computers were, I think the Lisa, the precursor to the Mac, was about $10,000.
Wow.
The personal computers, the Apple IIe and so on, they would have been about $2,500–3,000. Very little capability compared to now, but what you have in your hands now compared to then, and at the relatively low price, is phenomenal.
Obviously, there was a seismic shift in terms of technology and its use in business. Where did you see that? I mean, obviously, you were involved in it for over 30 years, so there must have been sort of points along that you went, oh, hang on a sec, there's a huge jump now.
Yeah, I think the the early stages of personal computers, they were sort of islands, and usually brought in by people who got frustrated at having to use the old company mainframe or mini computer. So they went a little bit rogue and bought a personal computer and used it in the office by themselves. I think one of the points of jumping, if you like, for adoption of more widespread computer use in business was networking, being able to link these together and being able to control and manage that network of users, and obviously the applications that came, the technology, the hardware was there, but it was really when I think Microsoft, they when they produced Windows in I think it was the it would have been around the mid 80s or the early late 80s and mid 90s. But when Microsoft Windows came out, it was a leap forward, because now it was, Apple was always seen as a little bit niche and used a lot by designers and graphic people, but wasn't mainstream. But with IBM PC and Microsoft Windows, you had some of the Apple type capability, but on an IBM machine, which was more industrial strength, or considered to be.
Yeah. I suppose most people tend to forget that email really only came on board about mid-90s.
That's right.
And it sort of was only being adopted then. We tend to think it's been around forever.
Yes, that's right. I can remember the first time I saw email. I was in Australia at that point. But
that's right. You've travelled quite extensively as well.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that in a second, but we'll talk about email.
So email became the killer app, as they call it, but it certainly wasn't in the beginning. It was probably spreadsheets and documents and to some extent graphics for Apple users.
Right. So it was quite restrictive. And then, of course, as you said, in the mid-90s, email came along. I suppose then we were seeing a lot of things starting to develop in terms of technology. How quick are business to adopt these things? I mean, large companies, sure enough, have the budget to spend, but smaller and mid-sized companies seem to be more reluctant to invest in technology, and that seems to be still the way today, if I'm not mistaken.
There's certainly a level of hesitancy, and small businesses typically don't have the luxury of being able to afford to experiment with things. So they tend to be, and this is generalizing, I know, but tend not to be early adopters, and so tend to wait until things are proven. But once they are, I think small businesses have caught up and are catching up, and in some areas they're moving ahead. So I think that in those days technology was considered to be something that supported the business, but nowadays you could say that technology is the business. If you're in the business of Uber or Just Eats or whatever, that is your business. Your
technology. I mean, it certainly has transformed certain industries. I mean, whoever thought that the main player in the taxi industry wouldn't own a taxi or employ a driver? So
exactly,
we see it out there. So there are great opportunities, and of course, you coming through, you must have seen some fantastic seismic changes in technology.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky to be around, as I said earlier, at the very start of the personal computer world. I was then around in the whole sort of client server when industrial strength applications were being used by businesses that were not based on mainframe old kludgy. They were actually based on microcomputer technology. And then I was also lucky to be around when the cloud wave took off. So over the last 35 years I've been lucky to have been involved in it, having come into it from being non-technical at all. I managed to sort of be in the right place at the right time.
You've learnt the language, which I think is very important. I think you've identified something there, and I'm surprised, because I do see businesses even today working a lot of their business off servers within their offices as opposed to using cloud-supported applications. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I often, because my last position in industry, if you like, was before I went out on my own doing what I'm doing now, was as head of IT for an American technology company called Citrix. And I came into that role as not having worked in IT, believe it or not, before. I came in to run the department. But because the one thing I noticed was that there was a huge amount of wastage of underutilized resources, servers that were not optimized, and that were needed. You tended to provision for the peak load. So if you had an end of quarter, end of month, you needed to have a lot of compute capacity. So you had to buy that capacity, and then if you didn't need it, you basically sat there idle until you needed it again. what the cloud computing model allows you to do is to dial up and down the capacity that you need. And it also, for smaller businesses, it removes a lot of the headache of managing the technology, and you just become a user of it, which I think is freedom for a lot of small business users. The headache of having some technical person maintain their server or servers was becoming burdensome.
Yes, I was talking to somebody there recently, and they had a server which had a time management system on it, which none of their staff used because it was so clunky and took so much time just to put their time up on it. So they
That's
just
right.
didn't bother, and management didn't bother to monitor it.
Yeah.
And I was quite surprised to see that in an organization, particularly today where cloud is available. People are hesitant sometimes in using cloud. They feel there's a security in having the server in my office. What would you say to people like that?
I mean, I think the vast majority of cloud players, and I would say that, the bigger ones like Amazon and Microsoft in particular, they invest so much in security that I would say it's safe to say that it's very unlikely that a small business owner would be able to keep their server in their office as secure as Amazon and Microsoft do, for the simple reason that the malicious players are constantly attacking. It's not that even if you secure it today, tomorrow, later today, there could be further attacks. So I think the very act of trying to keep up with the bad guys, if you like, is almost impossible unless you're focused on it. And the bigger players have lots of time and money and people to do that. So I would say it's far more secure to be in the cloud.
And I think that there's a lesson there for people, trying to maintain the server, paying people, and forgive me if you're one of those people supporting companies who have, there are roles for internal servers, but generally in this day and age, they're not as important as they were, and the freedom to be able to tap in to the cloud anytime you need it is far more relevant.
And sometimes it's the applications that are the limiting factor, that the application they use is one that they perhaps not available, or that there's a pain involved in making that transition. But from my experience, it's pain well worth spending, because it gives you so much more freedom and flexibility, and it actually ends up being a lot less expensive in the end.
If you're joining us now, you're listening to me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my studio guest is Martin Kelly of the Alternative Board, sharing his knowledge on business support and mechanisms, particularly technology, which is fascinating, that are available to business owners at the moment. I suppose just getting back to this, and people tend to forget about software as a service, which is a fantastic, I think is just brilliant.
Yeah.
But again, people seem to have a problem embracing it or understanding how that works.
Yeah. And I suppose I use the analogy just in terms of cloud overall, and software as a service being, the applications that enable that. But I think it's very much like the early stages of electricity production. So in the early stages, a lot of companies or even towns would have had their own electricity generating capability because they felt they needed to, for security reasons, for whatever reasons. And so there were lots and lots of fragmentation in that industry, and then it made sense to consolidate that into a utility that a smaller number of players would provide. And computing is really like that. It's a utility, and software is then the use. As a user, most business owners, whether they're small or large, their principal concern is the use of the technology rather than how it's managed, maintained, updated, backed up, etc. So they want to be able to turn a switch in the electricity model and the lights come on, and similarly in computing, they want to be able to sit down and their application is available to them. And software as a service provides that security and capability as and when you need it. And nowadays with smartphones, it can follow you around, so the technology is not dependent on you sitting at a machine. It can be in your pocket.
Yeah, anywhere in the world virtually.
Exactly.
That's connected. And that's the fascinating thing. I think there's a valuable lesson again for business owners there to look at this, because it has the flexibility. If you have 50 people working today and 25 working tomorrow, most of the sort of software available is licensed per user, so you have the ability to downsize it quickly or scale it quickly.
Exactly, and pay as you go. And the old days, you would have had to buy the application. You'd have to pay somebody to install it usually. Yeah. You'd have to train users on how to use it, and so on. And usually they came with large manuals and how-tos and all of that. Whereas nowadays, the software as a service generally is it's intuitive so that you can learn it as you go. You don't have to have a training course typically on most of the applications, and it scales up and down as you need. So there's huge flexibility there, and reliability that could be difficult to achieve in a server in the back office type thing.
One of the questions I suppose I'd ask you, in most companies, they do have a requirement for somebody from IT to give them a dig out here and there.
Yeah.
How do you find the right person, or what sort of questions would you be asking that might be relevant for them to ask to say, I think I've got the person who knows a bit about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because I had that when I took over IT for a fairly large technology company. I hadn't come from the IT. I'd come from the technology background, but not the IT component of it. And I was meeting my new colleagues and people on my team. And the one thing I found, my observation is, as I expected, very, very strong technically. What I was a little disappointed in is that the ability to understand the needs of the people they were serving. So right. I found, so to answer your question, I think what I would look for in a technology person is that combination of, yes, technical skills, but really understanding the customer, which sounds cliched, but unfortunately the industry has a lot of very strong engineers, but I think there's room for improvement on the customer-facing side of their role, particularly if they're looking after smaller businesses, who's typically they're not technologists or not people from a technology background, and so having that combination of, yes, technically good, but being able to serve the customer, I think, is what I would look for.
I suppose just moving the conversation on, you've come through industry, you spent 30 plus years in the technology sector, but you're involved now with the Alternative Board. Tell me a bit about this and how it supports business and how you bring your knowledge and skills to that.
Yeah, and although I've come from larger companies, they weren't always large. They typically, I was involved in a number of organizations that were startup, and what I'm doing now with technology, or with the Alternative Board, is providing a service to small business owners. And typically, a smaller company, a larger company would have a board of directors to provide advice and expertise and to hold leadership accountable. Smaller business owners typically don't have that. They don't have that range of expertise. So what the Alternative Board do is we bring together CEOs and owners from non-competing industries into a confidential group setting, where similar to a board of directors, where they can work together to deal with challenges or opportunities that they may face, and get input from their peers on better ways to handle an issue or better ways to deal with an opportunity that they're facing. Alongside that, I also provide one-on-one coaching with business owners, and I love doing that, because I at the back of it all, I've always seen my role as running a business, and I've a huge amount of admiration for people who take the courage to step out and do their own thing.
I think one of the things that a lot of people out there understand, firstly, it's lonely at the top.
Very.
But they don't realise the amount of support that's there, both in terms of people who will help them, but also people who have a structured way of helping them, like the Alternative Board. I believe the website is thealternativeboard.ie.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's great to have that, and the enthusiasm of people like yourself who've come from industry, have done it on many different levels.
Yeah, and I also did a number of years ago, I did a diploma in executive coaching, and I think that combination of experience and coaching is something that I really enjoy doing. And it is lonely as a business owner. You may have a partner or a colleague, but sometimes it's hard to discuss some of the issues or concerns or questions you might have with a colleague or a partner. And so a lot of business owners I talk to, they find it refreshing to be able to sit around a table and get ideas and suggestions and input from peer people in similar stage, maybe different industry, but a similar type size of business, and yeah, they enjoy that interaction, but also they find it very practically useful. It's not academic; it's very practical, because they can bring real issues and get real suggestions on how to resolve them.
I was fortunate enough in previous life myself to be part of one of those, and I must say I always appreciate that you discovered that everybody seems to have the same problems you have. They just rear their heads in different ways.
That's true, because I must say, before I joined the Alternative Board, I wondered what value there would be in people from different industries discussing issues. But actually, the issues are very similar across industries, and quite a lot is to do with people-related issues, or
Yes.
Coping with growth or contraction. Competitive landscape. So there's a huge amount, and sometimes the diversity of opinions is something that I'm a huge believer in. That sometimes if you get people from the same industry, and the technology industry is very like this, there's a lot of groupthink because people are all come from a similar background. Taking people in from a different perspective and giving them an opportunity to comment on an issue can often take it in a whole different direction. So very, very valuable.
Yeah, no, I'd certainly agree with that. I think there's also a presumption from people within the industry, oh, there's a problem, we can't really solve it because we're not thinking. Whereas when somebody comes in from outside, they ask a lot of questions because they don't understand what that industry is about, and often that unearths maybe a different approach to a particular challenge that's there.
It does, absolutely, and it's very powerful to see. And a lot of the members of the Alternative Board, they stay for. It's been in Ireland now for about 5 years, I think, and a lot of the members were people who started at the very beginning. So there's a huge amount of ongoing value. It's not a process of get a consultant in and they give you advice and move on. It's actually an ongoing part of running your business.
I suppose if I've just to sum up and to take the lessons we've learned today, technology is here to stay, and certainly you should be certainly staying abreast of it and understanding what it can do for business in terms of making you lean and more efficient and productivity. We have people like Martin here who has all of that experience and now wraps it up in his role as part of the Alternative Board, and that's thealternativeboard.ie, where he brings together business owners who share challenges and then, under a structured way of dealing with them, manages that for them.
Correct, and help each other.
And that's what it's all about. All right. Okay, that's all we've time for today. A special thanks to our guest, Martin Kelly of the Alternative Board, for coming into the You and Your Business studio today. Thanks also to Joanne on sound. Don't forget that you can contact the show by emailing yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie with your comments and suggestions. The podcast of today's show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. Thanks for your company, and please remember to join me, Alec Drew, again next week at the same time, 12:30, right here on 103.2 Dublin City FM for another edition of You and Your Business.